My family disowned me for my beliefs. I lost everything to stay true to myself. Family is supposed to mean unconditional love, but what happens when that love has conditions? This is the heartbreaking story of how I was disowned by my own family because of my beliefs, and how I found the strength to rebuild a life without them. The seeds of rebellion. Families are supposed to be a place of safety, a circle of people who hold you close no matter how stormy the world outside becomes. But in my family, safety came with conditions. Love was not given freely. It was earned through obedience, silence, and alignment with the beliefs passed down like heirlooms. Growing up, I never questioned it. My parents spoke with certainty about what was right and what was wrong, and their voices were so loud it drowned out my own. We went to church every Sunday, prayed before every meal, and decorated our home with scriptures that declared loyalty, purity, sacrifice. When I was younger, I followed without hesitation. I memorized verses, repeated the same lessons to anyone who asked, and convinced myself that I truly believed every word. My parents beamed with pride, and for a while, I thought that was enough. But adolescence is a dangerous time for certainty. It introduces cracks where doubt can slip through. I remember the first real moment of rebellion. It was during a Sunday sermon, the pastor preaching about damnation and obedience. His words thundered through the sanctuary, but my eyes wandered to the stained glass, sunlight streaming through colors that told stories of both suffering and hope. And in that moment, a quiet thought bloomed in my mind. What if he's wrong? It was small, almost invisible, but once planted, it grew. By the time I was 16, I was reading secretly, books I wasn't supposed to touch. Philosophy, science, history, stories of people who challenged the systems around them. I hid them under my bed, pulling them out late at night with a flashlight, my heart pounding as though the words themselves were contraband. The more I read, the more questions I had. Why did my family's faith demand absolute conformity? Why did every doubt feel like a sin? Why was love conditional on believing exactly what they did? The breaking point came when I voiced one of those questions aloud at dinner. My father had just finished blessing the food when I asked, what if people believe differently because they were born in a different place? Doesn't that make sense? The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth. My father's jaw tightened. That kind of talk, he said slowly, is dangerous. I'm just asking. You don't just ask, he snapped. You obey. You trust. You don't challenge the truth. His words landed like a gavel. I lowered my eyes and pushed food around my plate. But inside, the questions burned brighter. Over the next few years, those questions spilled into arguments. My parents accused me of rebellion, of arrogance, of being influenced by worldly lies. I accused them of blind faith, of clinging to rules they barely understood themselves. My siblings watched in silence, afraid to take sides. Some looked at me with pity, others with fear, as though I had already become the outcast. When I left for college, it felt like breathing for the first time. Away from home, I allowed myself to explore freely. I attended lectures, joined discussions, surrounded myself with people who didn't all think the same way. I read without hiding. I asked without whispering. And for the first time, I felt whole. But wholeness came with a price. The confrontation happened during winter break. I had gone home, determined to keep the peace, but my parents had other plans. After dinner one evening, my father called me into the living room. The whole family was there, gathered like a tribunal. My mother sat stiffly, hands clasped in prayer. My siblings avoided my eyes. My father's voice was steady. We've heard about the company you keep, the things you say, the doubts you spread. This cannot continue. I swallowed hard. I'm not spreading anything. I just don't believe the same way anymore. The words hung in the air like smoke. My mother flinched as though I had struck her. My father's eyes hardened. Then you are no longer part of this family, he said. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. The room tilted, my pulse roaring in my ears. You're disowning me? My voice cracked. You've chosen your path, he said coldly. And it is not ours. I left that night with nothing but a backpack. The door closed behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. I told myself I was free, but freedom tasted a lot like loss. Exile. The night I left home, The air was sharp with winter cold. My backpack felt too light for the weight of what I had lost. I walked down the quiet street, each step echoing louder than the last, as though the world itself wanted to remind me I was untethered now. I had nowhere certain to go. Sarah, my college roommate, had offered me her couch if I ever needed it, and that's where I headed. When she opened the door and saw my red eyes and trembling hands, she pulled me into a hug without asking questions. For the first time, I let myself cry without restraint. The first weeks were a blur of survival. I picked up extra shifts at the campus library, ate cheap noodles, and pretended I was fine. But the truth was, I felt hollow. Even though my family had disowned me, I couldn't stop thinking about them. I wondered what they said at the dinner table now, whether my siblings whispered my name in secret, whether my parents thought about me when they prayed. The silence from them was louder than any argument. Every now and then, I checked my phone, half hoping for a message, even an angry one. But there was nothing. The number that used to light up my screen daily had gone dark. One night, the ache became unbearable, and I wrote a long email to my mother. I poured out everything. How much I loved her, how much it hurt to be cut off, how I still wanted to be part of their lives even if we disagreed. I waited days for a reply. When it came, it was only 3 sentences. We love you, but love requires truth. Until you return to the faith, our home is closed to you. We will continue to pray for your soul. I read it over and over, each word another nail sealing the door behind me. Loneliness became my shadow. Walking through campus, I envied other students chatting on the phone with their parents, visiting home for Sunday dinners, laughing about family quirks. I carried my disownment like a secret scar, invisible but aching. But exile has a strange way of forcing growth. With no family to fall back on, I had to build a foundation of my own. I found solace in philosophy classes. I devoured texts on free thought, civil rights, spiritual diversity. The words of people who had once been silenced gave me strength. For every "you're lost" my parents had thrown at me, I found another voice whispering, "You are searching, and that is noble." I began writing essays of my own, pouring my pain into pages that turned into arguments, my grief into words that resonated with others. One professor encouraged me to submit to the campus journal. When my first piece was published, I held the thin magazine in my hands like it was a lifeline. For the first time since leaving, I felt seen. But the nights were still hard. Sometimes, lying awake in Sarah's living room, I replayed my father's words in my head. "You are no longer part of this family." They came like a curse, branding me. And yet, in the quiet hours, another thought would emerge. Maybe family is not just blood. Maybe it's chosen. Maybe it's built. I clung to that thought like a candle in the dark. As the semester went on, I began surrounding myself with others who knew the sting of rejection. There was Maya, whose parents had stopped speaking to her when she came out. There was Jordan, who had been cut off for refusing to follow the family business. And there was Luis, who had left behind an entire community after questioning its teachings. Together, we formed our own fragile circle, a patchwork family stitched together by loss and resilience. We cooked cheap dinners in Sarah's tiny kitchen, debated ideas until dawn, held each other through breakdowns, and celebrated small victories. For the first time since being cast out, I felt warmth again. But healing isn't linear. One spring afternoon, I spotted my younger brother across campus. He was visiting for a church youth event. My heart leapt, and before I could stop myself, I called his name. He froze, then walked quickly the other way. The rejection sliced deeper than anything my parents had said. I stood rooted to the spot, watching him disappear into the crowd, realizing my family's silence wasn't just a wall, it was a fortress, and they had locked me out completely. I went home and cried until I couldn't breathe. But when Maya and Sarah sat beside me, saying nothing, just holding me, I realized something important. I wasn't alone anymore. The idea of rebuilding didn't happen all at once. It started in fragments, writing, laughing with friends, cooking meals together, attending rallies, speaking out in class. Slowly, I began piecing together a new identity, one not defined by the rules I had rejected, but by the freedom I was learning to embrace. Still, Every step forward carried the echo of my family's absence. The wound remained, and I wondered, could I ever truly heal while that door remained shut? Rebuilding. Summer came, and with it, long days filled with light that seemed almost mocking. The warmth on my skin felt unearned, as though happiness had to be paid for with the approval of those I had lost. I told myself I was free, but freedom without belonging can feel like exile. It was during this season that I realized survival wasn't enough. I wanted more than to exist outside the walls of my family's world. I wanted to build something of my own. I started by leaning harder into my writing. My professors encouraged me, and soon I found myself standing in front of a packed lecture hall, reading aloud one of my essays about questioning inherited beliefs. My hands shook, but my voice grew stronger with each sentence. When the audience applauded, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't the silenced child at the dinner table anymore. I wasn't the one apologizing for asking questions. I was the one giving voice to doubts others were too afraid to say aloud. And in that moment, I understood. My family had tried to bury me, but in the soil of rejection, I had taken root. Maya, Jordan, Luis, Sarah, they became my true circle. We celebrated birthdays with makeshift cakes and candles stuck into muffins. We cooked enormous meals with mismatched pots, laughing as smoke alarms went off. We created traditions of our own, ones not tied to sermons or obligations, but to joy. One night, sitting cross-legged on the floor with them, I realized, this is family too. Blood had abandoned me, but love had found me again. Still, the wound of disownment bled quietly in the background. On holidays, I scrolled through social media, seeing photos of my siblings gathered around the dinner table, smiling stiffly in coordinated outfits. My absence was invisible, unspoken, erased. At first, the sight gutted me. But over time, I began to notice something else. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. My parents' grip on them looked heavy. I wondered how many of them stayed silent at that table, swallowing questions the way I once had. For the first time, I didn't just feel pity for myself. I felt pity for them too. The true turning point came during a campus rally. A group had organized a demonstration for freedom of expression, and I was invited to speak. Standing on the makeshift stage, microphone trembling in my hand, I looked out at the crowd, faces expectant, strangers who had come not to judge me, but to listen. I told my story. I spoke about being disowned, about the night the door closed behind me, about the ache of losing everything I thought was unshakable. And then I spoke about what I had gained, my voice, my chosen family, my freedom. By the time I finished, people were crying, applauding, hugging me after, whispering, "Thank you." I thought I was the only one. In their eyes, I saw something my family had never given me, affirmation that my doubts didn't make me broken. They made me brave. Months later, a letter arrived. It was from my younger sister, slipped into my campus mailbox. She wrote in tiny, careful handwriting, "I don't agree with everything you say, but I miss you. I wish things were different." Tears blurred the words. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a crack in the fortress wall, a reminder that maybe, one day, bridges could be rebuilt. For now, though, I held the letter close and whispered a promise to myself. I would never shrink again. Today, years later, I live in a small apartment filled with books and plants. My desk is cluttered with drafts and essays, some of which have been published, others waiting their turn. On the wall hangs a photo of me with Maya, Jordan, Luis, and Sarah, our arms around each other, faces bright with the kind of joy that comes from surviving together. Sometimes I still ache for the family I lost, but then I remind myself, being disowned didn't destroy me. It forced me to rebuild, and in rebuilding, I found a truer kind of belonging than I ever had before. I was disowned from my beliefs, but my beliefs also gave me back my life.